She walked into Mercy Creek with an empty purse, and the cowboy no one trusted made a choice that changed everything. The whole town saw the widow's pride break before her knees ever did. It happened on a cold evening in Mercy Creek, when the sky hung low and gray over the boardwalks, and the wind pushed dust through the street like it was sweeping away old sins. The lamps in the windows had just been lit. Horses stamped outside the livery. Somewhere near the jailhouse, a loose shutter knocked again and again, soft as a warning. Clara Whitcomb came down Main Street, holding her little girl's hand. Her dress was clean but faded, patched twice at the hem and once at the sleeve. Her boots had dust on them from a long walk, and the small bag in her other hand looked too light to hold much of anything. Beside her, 9-year-old Lily tried to keep her chin high just like her mother, but hunger had a way of showing itself in a child's eyes. Folks noticed. They always did in a small town. A few women paused near the mercantile window. 2 cattle hands leaning by the hitching rail stopped laughing. The barber lowered his razor and looked out through the glass. Nobody said much, but silence in Mercy Creek could speak louder than a church bell. Clara stopped in front of Dawson's Feed and Supply, where a paper had been nailed beside the door. It was a notice from the bank. Her fingers tightened around Lily's hand as she read the words one more time, though she already knew them by heart. Payment due. Land at risk. 30 days before further action. The Double C Ranch had been her husband's dream, then his grave, and now it was becoming a thing men in clean coats could take with ink and signatures. "Ma," Lily whispered, "are we going home?" Clara folded the paper at the corner with one trembling finger, then let it fall back against the wall. "Not yet, sweetheart." Across the street, Mason Reed watched from beneath the brim of an old black hat. He sat on a bench outside the livery, one shoulder against a post, his hands resting on his knees. He was 54, though most guessed older because grief had carved deep lines into his face. His beard was trimmed, his coat was worn, and his left hand bore an old scar that made 2 fingers stiff when the weather turned cold. No one in Mercy Creek called Mason friendly. Some called him bitter, some called him dangerous, most simply left him alone. He had come to town 3 years before with 1 horse, 1 saddle, and a silence so heavy it seemed to ride beside him. He took work breaking difficult horses and mending fences for ranchers who paid in cash and asked no questions. At night, he kept to himself in a small rented room behind the livery, where a tin cup, a Bible he never opened, and a folded woman's shawl sat on the shelf like pieces of a life he refused to touch. But that evening, when Clara Whitcomb turned away from the bank notice and guided Lily toward the back door of the mercantile, Mason stood. He did not know why at first. Maybe it was the way Lily looked at the bakery window and then quickly looked down, ashamed of wanting. Maybe it was the way Clara's shoulders stayed straight even while the rest of her seemed near collapse. Or maybe Mason had spent too many years watching good people sink while he pretended not to see. Inside Dawson's Feed and Supply, the air smelled of flour sacks, coffee beans, tobacco, and lamp oil. Mr. Dawson stood behind the counter, counting coins into a drawer. He looked up when Clara entered, and his face changed in the careful way a man's face changes when he expects bad news. "Evening, Mrs. Whitcomb." "Evening, Mr. Dawson." Lily stood close to her mother's skirt. Clara placed her bag on the counter. From it, she took 2 jars of peach preserves, a folded piece of lace, and a small silver comb. "I was wondering," Clara said, keeping her voice steady, "if you might trade for these." Mr. Dawson looked down at the things, then away. Clara swallowed. "Or if your wife needs washing done, sewing, mending, I can scrub floors too. I can work mornings, evenings, Sundays after church. I am not asking for charity." The last sentence came out sharper than she meant. Mr. Dawson's wife appeared from the back room. Her eyes softened at the sight of Lily, but softness did not fill shelves or pay bills. "Clara," she said gently, "we already have help." "I'll take less." The room went quiet. Mason had stepped inside without anyone hearing him. He stood near the door, rain-dark wind pushing in behind him before it swung shut. Clara saw him and stiffened. Everybody knew Mason Reed, or at least knew enough to keep distance. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitcomb, maybe the church ladies could arrange something." "No," Clara said. It was one small word, but it carried 2 years of burial dirt, unpaid debt, and nights spent cutting one biscuit in half so her child could have the larger piece. Lily looked up at her. "Ma, it's all right." That nearly broke her. Clara turned her face away, but Mason saw the tear before she could hide it. It slipped down fast, and she wiped it with the heel of her hand as if angry at herself for letting it escape. "I have work," Mason said. Every eye turned toward him. Clara looked at him as though he had stepped out of a shadow. "What kind of work?" "My shirts need mending. My coats need patching. I have saddle blankets that need washing and a room that needs cleaning." He paused, his jaw working once before he added, "And I eat worse than a stray dog, so cooking would not hurt either." Mr. Dawson stared at him. "Mason." Mason did not look away from Clara. "It is honest work." Clara's pride rose like a shield. "I will not be pitied by you, Mr. Reed." "Good," he said. "I have no talent for pity." Lily blinked at him, unsure whether to be afraid. "How much?" Clara asked. $15 for the week, more if the cooking does not poison me." Mrs. Dawson gave a small gasp. $15 was too much, and everyone in the room knew it. Clara knew it most of all. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" Mason held her gaze. For a moment, the hard man people feared seemed tired more than anything else. "Because I have work," he said quietly, "and you said you need it." Outside, thunder rolled beyond the hills. Clara looked at Lily, then at the small silver comb on the counter, the last pretty thing she owned. Slowly, she put it back into her bag. "I start tomorrow," she said. "No," Mason replied. "You start tonight. There is stew at the cafe, and the child looks like she could use some." Clara's mouth trembled, but she lifted her chin again. "I will pay you back for supper." "I expect you will." He opened the door for them, and the cold wind swept around their feet. None of them saw the man standing across the street under the bank awning, watching through the rain with a gloved hand resting on a polished cane. Silas Vale, president of Mercy Creek Bank, had already marked the Double C Ranch for himself. And when he saw Mason Reed walk beside Clara Whitcomb, his expression turned colder than the storm. The cafe sat beside the blacksmith shop, warm with lamplight and the smell of beans, beef, and fresh bread. Rain tapped against the windows while wind pushed along the street outside, making the hitching posts creak like old bones. Clara stepped inside first, though every part of her wanted to turn around. The room was nearly full. Ranch hands sat over plates of supper. 2 women from the church shared tea near the stove. A stage driver warmed his hands around a tin cup. The talk faded when Clara entered with Lily, and it died completely when Mason Reed came in behind them. Clara felt the eyes. She had felt them for months. Folks watched hunger different than they watched sorrow. Sorrow made them lower their voices. Hunger made them look away. Martha Bell, who owned the cafe with her husband, came from behind the counter wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was round and kind, but even kindness had to survive in a town where credit was dangerous. "Evening, Clara," Martha said softly. "Evening." Mason removed his hat. 3 plates of stew, bread if you have it, coffee for me, milk for the child." Clara's cheeks flushed. "Water is fine for Lily." "Milk," Mason said, setting coins on the counter. Lily looked up at her mother, afraid to want too much. Martha glanced from Mason to Clara and seemed to understand more than anyone had spoken. "I have milk." They sat in the far corner, away from the stove, away from the nearest listening ears. Clara placed Lily between herself and the wall, like she could protect the child even from whispers. Mason sat across from them, broad shoulders bent forward, scarred hands folded on the table. For a while, nobody said much. Then the food came. Lily tried to eat slowly. She tried hard, but her spoon shook and the first mouthful made her eyes close in a way that pierced Clara worse than any insult could have. The child was not greedy. She was starving quietly. Clara lowered her gaze to her own bowl. Mason saw it. He saw how she watched Lily's bread before touching her own. He saw how she pushed half of her portion closer to the child without making a show of it. He knew that kind of sacrifice. It was the sort that left no scar others could see, only a hollowness behind the ribs. "You said I start tonight," Clara said at last, keeping her voice low. "After supper I can wash whatever needs washing." "No need tonight." Her eyes sharpened. "Then why did you say it?" "Because I figured you would not accept supper unless it had a wage tied to it." Clara stared at him. For the first time, a small sound escaped Lily. It might have been a laugh, but she covered it fast, unsure if laughter was allowed in their life anymore. Clara did not laugh. "You think you know me." "No," Mason said. "I know pride when it is the last coat a person owns." Something in his words took the anger from her face. Not all of it, but enough. Martha passed near their table with a coffee pot. "You folks need anything else?" "No, ma'am," Clara said. Lily looked at the bread basket, then quickly looked down. Martha saw. She left without a word and returned with one more biscuit wrapped in a cloth. She placed it beside Clara, not Lily, and said, "For later, if work runs long." Clara's fingers rested on the cloth, her lips pressed together. "Thank you," she whispered. Across the room, one of the ranch hands muttered something under his breath. Mason turned his head slowly. The man stopped smiling and looked into his coffee. The cafe grew quiet again. When they stepped back into the rain, Lily held the wrapped biscuit under her coat like treasure. The street had turned to mud. Lanterns swung from hooks, making yellow circles in the wet dark. Mason walked them toward the small wagon Clara had borrowed from a neighbor, its tired mule standing with its head low against the storm. "I can drive you home," Mason said. "I can manage." "I did not say you could not." Clara looked at him, rain gathering on her lashes. "Mr. Reed, I have had men offer help before. It always came with a hook hidden in it." Mason's face did not change, but his eyes did. "Mine has no hook." "Why should I believe that?" He looked down the street toward the bank, where one upstairs window still glowed. Silas Vale's shadow moved behind the curtain. "Because I know what it is to lose land to a man who never sweated for it." Clara followed his gaze. "You know Mr. Vale." "I know his kind." It was not an answer, and Clara heard the locked door inside it. Mason helped Lily into the wagon, then stepped back before Clara could accuse him of doing too much. As she climbed up, a folded paper slipped from her bag and landed in the mud. Mason bent to pick it up. It was the bank notice. He meant only to hand it back, but the rain had blurred part of the ink, and still one line stood clear near the bottom. "Inspected and found in declining condition by authority of the lender." Mason's thumb stopped on the words. "Inspected?" he asked. Clara took the paper quickly. "Mr. Vale came out last week." "Did he walk the land?" "No, he stood by the gate." "Did he enter the barn, count stock, look at the well?" Clara shook her head, confused. "He said he did not need to. He said the clause allowed him judgment." Mason's jaw tightened. "What is it?" she asked. He looked again toward the bank window. "That man is moving faster than he should." A flicker of fear crossed Clara's face, but she hid it by gathering the reins. "The note was my husband's. I have known that from the start." "Maybe so," Mason said, "but a debt and a theft can wear the same coat." Before Clara could ask what he meant, a voice came from the dark behind them. "Careful, Reed." Silas Vale stood beneath the awning of the bank, polished cane in hand, coat dry as if the rain itself respected him. "This town has enough trouble without old ghosts teaching widows how to fight battles they cannot win." Mason went still. Clara looked from one man to the other, and for the first time that night, she understood something cold and dangerous. Mason Reed and Silas Vale were not strangers. Rain slid from the brim of Mason's hat, but he did not move. The street between him and Silas Vale looked narrow in the lamplight, yet it felt wide as a canyon. Clara sat on the wagon seat with the reins loose in her hands. Lily had gone quiet beside her, holding the biscuit under her coat like it might save them all. Silas smiled first. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a man wore when he had counted every coin before the game even started. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, tipping his hat just enough to look proper. "I did not mean to trouble you. I only wish to remind Mr. Reed that Mercy Creek is a peaceful town." Mason's voice came low, peaceful for men who own the locks. Silas's eyes cooled, still speaking in riddles after all these years. Clara looked sharply at Mason, all these years. He did not answer her silent question. His gaze stayed fixed on Silas, hard and steady, but there was something behind it too. Not fear, not exactly, more like an old wound touched by cold fingers. Silas stepped down from the bank awning. His polished boots sank only a little into the mud, as if even the street did not dare cling to him. "You are welcome to mend shirts for Mrs. Whitcomb," he said. "You are welcome to feed strays and play the generous man, but that ranch is under note and I hold the paper. I will not have some hired hand filling her head with foolish hope." "I am not your hired hand," Mason said. "No," Silas replied softly. "You were never steady enough for that." Clara saw Mason's scarred hand close at his side. For a breath, the whole street seemed to hold still. A horse shifted outside the saloon. A lantern chain groaned in the wind. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the dark hills. Then Lily whispered, "Ma, I want to go home." The sound of the child's voice cut through the tension like a church bell. Mason stepped back. Clara lifted the reins. Her pride begged her not to look at Mason, but fear made her do it anyway. "What did he mean?" she asked. Mason's face had shut again. "Nothing that helps you tonight." "That is not an answer." "No," he said. "It is the only one I can give in the rain with your girl shivering." Clara wanted to press him. She wanted to demand the truth right there in the muddy street. But Lily's shoulders were trembling under her coat, and the mule was tired, and the double C was still 4 miles out. So Clara clicked her tongue and turned the wagon toward home. Mason watched until the darkness swallowed them. Silas came closer, his cane tapping once against the boardwalk. "You should have stayed buried, Reed." Mason did not look at him. "You should have stayed honest." At that, Silas gave a soft laugh. "Honest men end poor, you taught me that." Mason turned then, and for one quick moment the hard lines of his face broke open with something raw. "No," he said, "you taught me what a poor man loses when he trusts the wrong friend." Silas's smile vanished. Mason walked away before either man said more. The next morning came pale and cold. Clouds hung over the prairie, and the grass around the double C shone with rain. Clara had slept little. Every time the house creaked, she thought of the bank notice nailed in town. Every time Lily turned in her sleep, Clara thought of Mason and Silas standing in the street like two men tied together by a grave. The ranch house had once been cheerful. Clara still remembered blue curtains in the kitchen, Samuel Whitcomb laughing by the stove, Lily chasing a barn kitten across the porch. Now the curtains were faded. The stove smoked unless the door was propped just right. The porch sagged on one side where Samuel had promised to repair it before fever took him in the spring. Clara stood at the sink, washing the same tin plate twice because her mind would not settle. A knock sounded at the door. She wiped her hands and opened it. Mason stood on the porch with a sack over one shoulder and a bundle of clothes under his arm. Behind him, his bay horse waited near the gate, ears flicking at the wind. "I brought the work," he said. Clara looked past him toward the road. "Did Mr. Vale send you away?" "He does not send me anywhere." "That is not what it looked like last night." Mason shifted the sack down. "May I come in?" For a moment, Clara hesitated. She had lived long enough to know that loneliness could make a woman careless. But Mason stood with his hat in his hand, reins still clinging to his coat, waiting like the choice belonged fully to her. She stepped aside. The kitchen was small but clean. Lily sat at the table with a slate, trying to write sums while pretending not to stare at Mason. He set the bundle on a chair. There were shirts, socks, 2 torn coats, and a pair of saddle blankets that smelled of horse and trail dust. Clara lifted one coat and saw a long tear across the shoulder. This was not made by normal wear. "Horse took offense to me." Lily's eyes widened. "Did it throw you?" Twice. Did you get back on? Mason glanced at her, third time he listened. For the first time since they had met him, Lily smiled without fear. Clara saw it and looked away quickly, because hope hurt when it came too soon. Mason opened the sack: coffee, flour, beans, thread, and lamp oil. Clara's face hardened. Mr. Reed. Materials, he said before she could refuse. You cannot wash, cook, or sew with empty shelves. I told you I do not take charity. And I told you I am poor at pity. He placed a small, folded paper beside the sack. This is a list of work. You mark hours. I pay wages. The supplies come out of what I owe you if that makes it easier to bear. Clara picked up the paper. His writing was rough but careful. He had listed every task in plain words, as if building a fence between help and shame. Her fingers softened around the page. Why does Mr. Vale hate you? She asked. Mason looked toward the window. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwood branches Samuel had planted years before. He does not hate me. Then what? He remembers me. Clara waited. Mason's mouth tightened. 15 years ago, I owned land west of Abilene. Good grass, good water, a wife who could make a room feel like morning. Silas Vale was my partner then, not in name on the deed, but in cattle, loans, and plans. I trusted him because he called me brother. Lily stopped writing. Mason reached into his coat and touched something hidden there, then let his hand fall. One winter, sickness hit the herd. I went north to buy replacement stock. When I came back, the bank had papers I had never seen, debts I did not understand, and my wife was already sick from worry. Silas told me he tried to save what he could. Clara's voice was soft, but he did not. No, Mason looked at her then. He saved himself. The room grew very still. Clara thought of Silas at the bank window. She thought of the notice, the false inspection, and the way he looked at her ranch like it already belonged to him. What happened to your wife? She asked. Mason's eyes dropped to the floorboards. She died before spring. No one spoke, even the wind seemed to quiet. Mason picked up his hat. I will come back this evening for the first bundle. He stepped toward the door, but Lily's small voice stopped him. Mr. Reed. He turned. She held out half of the biscuit Martha had given her the night before. It had been wrapped and saved, though hunger must have tempted her all morning. You can have some, she said. Mason stared at the little piece of bread in her palm. His face changed in a way Clara could not name. Slowly he knelt, taking only the smallest corner. Thank you, Miss Lily. After he left, Clara stood by the window and watched him ride toward the lower pasture, instead of the road back to town. He had not come only for mending. He was looking at her fences, her well, her barn roof, her land. And for the first time in many months, Clara wondered if the double C was not dead yet. If this small kindness touched your heart, stay with the story, because the secret between Mason Reed and Silas Vale was only beginning to rise from the dust. By noon, Mason Reed had walked every weak place on the double C. He moved slowly, not because he was lazy, but because he saw things most men passed over. A leaning post, a split rail, a low place where rainwater stood too long, a patch of grass eaten down to dirt because the cattle had been kept too close to the house after Clara stopped trusting the far pasture. Clara followed him with a notebook in one hand and doubt in her chest. She had expected him to look once around and tell her what everyone else had been telling her for months. Sell while there was still something left to sell. Take Lily and move into town. Work laundry. Let the land go before it took the last of her strength. But Mason did not speak like that. He touched the fence wire, bent down near the well, checked the barn door hinges, then stood in the wind and studied the north pasture like he was reading a long letter from the earth. You have water, he said. Clara looked toward the well, for now. No, more than for now, he pointed past the cottonwoods. That draw out there carries spring runoff. Your husband ever dam it. Samuel talked about it. He talked about many things. The words came out with more ache than she meant. She looked away, ashamed of sounding bitter toward a dead man who had done his best. Mason did not judge her. Dreamers keep a place alive, he said, but somebody has to mend what dreams leave unfinished. Clara glanced at him, and that somebody is supposed to be me. That somebody has been you for 2 years. She closed the notebook slowly. No one had ever said it that way before. They had called her poor, stubborn, unfortunate, a widow with more land than sense, but Mason said it like survival was a kind of work worth respecting. They moved toward the barn. Inside, dust floated through shafts of pale light. The roof had 3 open gaps where rain had come in. Old harness hung from wooden pegs. A broken plow leaned in the corner. The place still smelled of hay, leather, and the faint memory of better seasons. Lily sat on an overturned bucket, brushing a small brown calf with more care than the animal deserved. The calf had been born late and weak, and Clara had nearly lost it during the last cold snap. Lily had named him Button because one ear was round and small. "Mr. Reed," Lily called, "Button ate from my hand." Mason stepped closer and studied the calf. "That means he trusts you." Lily smiled. "Do cows know when people are sad?" Mason took off his hat and rubbed one thumb along the brim. "Most animals know more than folks think." Lily nodded, serious as a judge, and went back to brushing. Clara watched Mason watch the child. There was something in his face again, a shadow but not the sharp kind he wore around Sela's veil. This was softer, heavier. "You had children?" Clara asked quietly. Mason looked at the calf. "A son." She regretted the question the moment his voice changed. "I am sorry," she said. He did not live long enough to know the world was cruel. Mason placed his hat back on. "Maybe that was a mercy, maybe it was not. I never settled it." Clara felt the air leave her chest. For all his hard silence, Mason Reed carried more graves than anyone had guessed. Before she could speak, a rider appeared at the barn entrance. It was Thomas Pike, Sela's Vale's clerk. He was young, narrow-faced, and always dressed better than his wages should allow. He sat on a gray horse and held a leather folder beneath his coat to keep it dry from the wet wind. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, not stepping down. "Mr. Vale sends notice." Clara straightened. "Another one." Thomas looked at Mason, then back at Clara. "This is a formal request for inspection. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Mr. Vale will come with witnesses to confirm the present condition of the property." Mason's eyes sharpened. Clara stepped forward. "He inspected last week." Thomas opened the folder and removed a paper. "The bank reserves the right to verify improvement or decline." "That is not what the note says," Mason said. Thomas swallowed. He was less bold with Mason standing near. "I am only delivering the paper." Mason took it before Clara could reach. He read it once, then again. Clara watched his jaw tighten. "What is it?" she asked. Mason handed it to her. The words were polite. That made them worse. Every line had been written to sound fair while leading to one ending. If the ranch was found unfit, Sela's could call the debt due at once. If Clara resisted, legal costs would be added to the note. If livestock or equipment appeared neglected, the bank could appoint a manager. "A manager?" Clara looked up. "He means to take control before the 30 days. Mason nodded once. Thomas shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Vale said if you cooperate, he may be generous with time." Mason laughed without humor. Sela's Vale has never been generous with anything he could own. The young clerk looked frightened then. Not angry, frightened. His eyes flicked to Clara, and for one brief moment she saw shame there. "Thomas," Clara said softly, "did Mr. Vale tell you to write that first inspection?" His hand tightened on the reins. "I should get back. Did you ever come out here last week?" Thomas did not answer. Mason stepped closer, not threatening, only steady. "A lie written in ink is still a lie, boy." Thomas looked at the ground. Then he spoke so low Clara almost missed it. "I did not see the property." Clara's heart thudded. Mason's voice stayed calm. "Who signed the report?" Thomas's face went pale. "Good day, Mrs. Whitcomb." He wheeled his horse and rode off hard, mud kicking up behind him. Clara stood with the paper in her hand, the barn dim around her, Lily silent behind the calf. He lied, Clara whispered. Silas lied on a bank record. Yes, Mason said. Can we prove it? Mason looked toward the road where Thomas had vanished. Not yet. The words should have crushed her. Instead, they lit something small and dangerous inside her chest. Clara folded the notice and tucked it into her apron pocket. Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. Then we make the ranch ready by 10 tomorrow. Mason turned to her. The fences are poor, she said. The barn roof is poor. The cattle are thin, but if he comes looking for a dead place, we show him a living one. For the first time since he had arrived, Mason almost smiled. That will take all night. Clara looked at Lily, then at the old barn, then out at the gray land Samuel had loved and Silas Vale wanted to steal. Then we work all night. By sunset, 2 lamps burned in the barn, the wind had turned colder, and Mason was climbing onto the roof with a hammer in his hand. But from the far ridge, another rider watched the double sea in silence before turning back toward town. Night settled over the double sea like a heavy blanket, but nobody inside its fences slept. The wind came down from the north in sharp breaths, rattling loose boards and making the lantern flames bend sideways. Mason worked on the barn roof with a hammer, a mouthful of nails, and the stubborn patience of a man who had once learned to keep standing because falling had cost too much. Below him, Clara held the ladder steady. Every strike of his hammer sounded across the dark pasture. Lily carried kindling from the woodpile to the barn, wrapped in her mother's shawl. Button the calf lay in fresh straw, watching them all with sleepy eyes. The few cattle still left on the place moved like shadows beyond the fence, their breath pale in the cold. You should take Lily inside, Mason called down. Clara looked up. She will sleep once the roof stops leaking. That may be morning. Then morning it is. Mason glanced down at her. The lantern light touched her face from below, showing the tired hollows beneath her eyes. But there was fire in her too, not loud, not reckless, but steady. He had seen many men talk brave over whiskey and fold by daylight. Clara Whitcomb did not talk brave. She simply kept going. That was harder. By midnight, the worst holes in the roof were covered with salvaged planks and tar cloth. The barn would not impress a rich man, but it would stand against rain. Mason climbed down stiffly, rubbing his scarred left hand. Clara noticed. Your hand pains you. It complains. That is not the same as answering. He flexed his fingers. 2 of them would not straighten all the way. Old break, poor doctor, worse patient. From a horse? No. She waited. Mason looked toward the dark pasture. For a moment, Clara thought he might close up again. Instead, he reached into his coat and drew out a small leather pouch. From inside, he took a brass button, dulled by years of touch. My wife sewed this on my coat the morning I rode north, he said. I lost the coat later, kept the button. Clara did not move. She told me not to trust Silas with the books, said a man who smiled with only his mouth was hiding something. I laughed at her, told her business was men's trouble. His face tightened. She was right and I was proud. Clara looked at the button in his palm, such a small thing to hold so much sorrow. What was her name? She asked. Ellen. The name came out carefully, like it had been kept wrapped away for years. Ellen got sick after the bank took our place. We were living in a room behind a freight office. It was damp, cold. I spent my days trying to find work and my nights telling her I would fix it, but some things will not wait for a man to stop being foolish. Clara's throat tightened, and your son. Mason closed his hand around the button, buried before his first winter. The barn seemed to grow quieter around them. Even the wind softened for a breath. Clara wanted to say something kind, but some grief was too large for small words. So she did what she knew how to do. She stepped to the workbench, picked up a strip of cloth, and wrapped it around Mason's knuckles where the skin had split from hammering. He watched her fingers move. You do not have to do that, he said. I know. The cloth was clean but worn thin. Her hands were cold. His were rough and broad, marked by labor and weather. Neither of them spoke until the knot was tied. Then Lily's voice came from the barn door. Ma. Clara turned. What is it, sweetheart? There is a light on the ridge. Mason moved first. He stepped outside, eyes narrowing against the dark. At first there was only the black line of the hill and the low sweep of clouds. Then he saw it. A small lantern, briefly uncovered, then hidden again. Someone was watching. Clara came beside him. Is it Thomas? Maybe. Or Silas. Silas does not sit in the cold when he can pay another man to do it. Mason crossed to his horse and pulled a rifle from the saddle boot. He did not raise it. He only held it low, a tool more than a threat. Clara's face paled. I do not want trouble here. Neither do I. Lily stood behind them, clutching the shawl. Mason looked at Clara. Take her inside, bar the door. I am going to circle wide and see who it is. No, Clara said. He blinked, no. This is my land. If someone is watching it, I will know who. That is not wise. I have been alone on this ranch for 2 years, Mr. Reed. Do not speak to me as if darkness is new. The words struck him harder than anger would have. He lowered his voice. Then stay behind me. I will walk beside you. They moved through the pasture without a lantern, guided by the pale breaks in the clouds. Lily remained in the house, the door barred, one small face visible at the window until Clara motioned her back. Mud sucked at Clara's boots. Grass brushed her skirt. Mason walked quietly for a man his size, stopping now and then to listen. The ridge light disappeared, but a horse snorted ahead. They found the rider near a stand of scrub oak. Thomas Pike sat frozen in his saddle, lantern covered under his coat. He looked more boy than man in the dark, his hat crooked, his face tight with fear. Mason lowered the rifle. You picked a poor hour for visiting. Thomas swallowed. I had to make sure Mr. Vale's men were gone. Clara stepped forward. Men. Thomas looked at her, ashamed. 2 of them came to town after supper. They are not bank clerks. Mr. Vale told them to ride out before dawn and note every weakness they could find before the inspection. Loose fence, lame stock, roof holes, anything. Mason's eyes hardened. Why tell us? Thomas reached into his coat and took out a folded ledger page. My father lost his farm to Mr. Vale when I was 12, he said. I thought working for him would keep my mother safe. It has not. It only taught me how he takes things. Clara stared at the paper in his hand. Thomas held it out. This shows payments your husband made that were never credited proper. Not all of them, just enough to prove the bank record is crooked. Clara took the page slowly. Her fingers trembled. How did you get this? She whispered. I copied it after Mr. Vale locked up. If he learns I have it, I am finished. Mason looked across the ridge, then back at the young clerk. You may already be. Thomas nodded once. I know. For a long moment, Clara could not speak. The paper in her hand felt heavier than any tool she had lifted that night. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was a crack in Silas Vale's wall. If you believe one brave choice can change a life, hold close to this moment, because Thomas had just risked everything for the truth. Then a sound rose from the road below. Hoofbeats. Not one horse. Several. Mason stepped in front of Clara as shapes appeared in the dark, riding toward the double C. The hoofbeats came fast through the dark, striking the wet road with a hard, ugly rhythm. Mason held one hand low, warning Clara and Thomas to stay still. The ridge gave them a little cover, but not much. Below, 3 riders moved toward the double C with lanterns swinging from their saddles. Their coats were dark. Their hats were pulled low. They did not ride like neighbors coming to help. They rode like men who had already decided the land did not belong to the woman sleeping under its roof. Clara's breath caught. Lily, she whispered. Mason looked toward the ranch house. A faint glow still burned in the kitchen window. Behind that glass was a child alone with a barred door and more courage than any child should need. Go, he said. Clara did not argue this time. She tucked the copied ledger page inside her bodice, gathered her skirt, and started down the slope, keeping low through the grass. Thomas moved to follow, but Mason caught his sleeve. You stay behind me. I can help. You already did. Do not waste it by getting yourself seen too soon. The three riders reached the outer fence. One dismounted and kicked at a loose post with his boot. Another leaned from the saddle, holding his lantern close to the wire. "Write that down," the first man said. "Fence unfit." The third rider laughed. "Won't take long, this whole place is unfit." Mason's jaw clenched. He knew their kind, not true cowboys, not men who loved cattle, weather, and hard ground. These were hired hands with clean pistols and dirty work, men who could break a gate, then swear it had already been broken. One of them rode toward the barn. Clara reached the kitchen door just as Lily opened it from inside, her small face white in the lamplight. "Ma." "Hush now." Clara slipped inside, took Lily by the shoulders, and knelt before her. "Listen to me. You are brave, but I need you wiser than brave. Go to the root cellar and stay there until I call." "What about Mr. Reed?" "He knows what he is doing." Lily's eyes filled. People always say that before something bad happens. The words struck Clara deep. She pulled her daughter close and held her tight for one heartbeat, too, then forced herself to let go. "Take Button's blanket from the peg. It will keep you warm." Lily obeyed, though tears shone on her cheeks. Outside, a lantern flared near the barn. Clara stepped onto the porch, just in time to see one of the men lift a pry bar toward the repaired roof planks. "Do not touch that barn," she called. The man turned. His face was half hidden by shadow, but his grin showed clear enough. "Evening, ma'am, bank business." "Bank business comes at 10 in the morning." He rested the pry bar against his shoulder. "Mr. Vale likes a full report." "You are trespassing." Another rider laughed. "Hear that, Orrin? Widow knows big words." Clara stepped down from the porch. Her legs trembled under her skirt, but her voice held. "Leave my land." The man called Orrin walked toward her. "Land under note is a delicate matter. We are only looking." "With a pry bar?" He smiled wider. Before he could answer, Mason's voice came from the dark. "She asked you to leave." All three men turned. Mason stood by the gate with Thomas behind him, rifle held low in both hands. He did not point it at anyone. He did not need to. The way he stood was warning enough. Orrin spat into the mud. "This ain't your concern, Reed." "It became my concern when you rode onto a widow's property after midnight." "We got orders." "Then carry them back." The second rider swung down from his horse. "You always did talk like a man with more friends than he has." Mason's eyes moved over him. "Do I know you?" The man stepped into the lantern light. Mason's face changed. Clara saw it from the porch, not fear, recognition. "Caleb Rusk," Mason said. Caleb touched the brim of his hat. "Been a long time." "Not long enough." Thomas leaned closer to Mason and whispered, "He works for Vale when papers fail." Caleb heard and smiled. "Careful, boy, clerks are easy to replace." Thomas went pale but did not run. Orrin lifted the pry bar again. "We are making note of the property condition." Mason raised the rifle halfway, still not aimed at a man, just high enough to make the night go silent. "The barn stands as it stands. You break it, you explain it to Sheriff Bell in the morning." Caleb chuckled. "Sheriff Bell owes Vale money same as half this town." "Maybe," Mason said, "but Martha Bell served supper to Mrs. Whitcomb's child tonight. A man's debts and his conscience do not always sleep in the same bed." For the first time, Caleb's smile thinned. Clara felt something shift. It was small but real. Mason was not fighting with force. He was calling witnesses who were not there yet. He was putting names into the dark. Orrin looked uncertain. "Mr. Vale said no trouble." "Then stop making it," Clara said. Her voice surprised even herself. The men looked at her. She stepped farther from the porch, hands at her sides, rainwater from the eaves dripping behind her. "This ranch is not abandoned. My child sleeps here. My husband is buried on the hill beyond that pasture. Every board you break, every lie you write, every hoofprint you leave will be named in town tomorrow." Caleb tilted his head. "You threatening us, Mrs. Whitcomb?" "No," she said. "I am remembering you." That landed harder than a shout. Mason looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw respect so plain it warmed her even in the cold. The three men muttered among themselves. At last, Caleb stepped back into his saddle. "Inspection is at 10, he said. Vale will not be as patient as us." Mason lowered the rifle. Silas Vale was never patient, that is why he makes mistakes. Caleb's gaze flicked to Thomas. For one dangerous second, Clara feared he knew. Then the riders turned and left, their lanterns bobbing away down the road until darkness swallowed them. Only when the sound faded did Clara's knees nearly give out. Mason crossed the yard fast and caught her by the elbow before she fell. His grip was firm but gentle. "You held," he said. She laughed once shakily. "I nearly fainted." "But you held." Thomas came forward, wringing his hat. "Mr. Vale will know somebody warned you." "Maybe," Mason said, "but not who." Clara touched the hidden ledger page through the cloth of her dress. "At 10, he comes expecting weakness." Mason looked toward the east, where the first faint gray of morning had begun to gather. "Then by 10, he said, "we give him witnesses, truth, and a ranch that refuses to die." Inside the house, Lily opened the cellar door and called for her mother. But before Clara could answer, a church bell rang in town, too early and too hard for morning prayer. The church bell kept ringing. It cut through the cold morning air, wild and uneven, not like Sunday call, not like wedding joy, not like mourning. This was warning. Each hard strike rolled over the prairie and came back from the hills with a sound that made Clara's blood turn cold. Lily ran from the cellar with Button's blanket still around her shoulders. "Ma, what is it?" Clara pulled her close and looked toward town. Mercy Creek sat 4 miles away, hidden beyond a rise and a line of cottonwoods, but the bell sounded close enough to shake the windows. Mason stood in the yard, listening. "That is no prayer bell," he said. Thomas Pike's face had gone pale as flour. "The bank." Clara turned to him. "What about it?" Thomas swallowed. "Mr. Vale keeps a bell cord tied at the church vestry for emergencies. Fire, robbery, trouble with the vault. If that bell rings before sunrise, it means he called for the sheriff." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Or he wants the town looking one way while he moves another." They did not have to wait long to learn which. A rider came hard over the east road, horse lathered, coat flying. It was Sheriff Daniel Bell, Martha's husband, a square-built man with tired eyes and a gray mustache. He pulled up at the gate, breathing as hard as his horse. "Clara," he called. "Mason, I need to speak plain and fast." Clara stepped forward, Lily tucked behind her skirt. "What happened?" Sheriff Bell looked at Thomas and his gaze sharpened. "You too, boy. Vale says his office was broken into last night, says papers were stolen from his private ledger, says he has reason to believe Mrs. Whitcomb had help." Thomas looked ready to fall. Mason moved half a step in front of him. "That is a strong claim before breakfast." "It gets stronger," the sheriff said. "Vale says he is coming here with men from town and a complaint already written. He wants the property searched." Clara felt the copied page against her chest like a hot coal. Lily's small hand found hers. Mason looked at the sheriff. "And you believe him?" Sheriff Bell did not answer at once. He looked toward the patched barn roof, the mended fence near the gate, the muddy tracks left by 3 riders in the night. His face changed. "I believe Silas Vale knows how to make a lie stand up straight," he said. "That is not the same thing." Clara stared at him. "Then help us." The sheriff took off his hat and wiped rain from the brim, though the rain had stopped. "Clara, I am not here to drag you. Martha told me about supper. Thomas's mother came to our door before dawn crying because her son never came home. Then that bell started ringing. I figured I ought to reach you before Vale did." Thomas shut his eyes for a moment. "My mother knows." "She knows enough to be scared." Mason stepped close to the sheriff. "Those men came here in the night. Caleb Rusk was one of them." Sheriff Bell's jaw tightened. "Rusk." "They meant to damage the property before the inspection." "Can you prove it?" Clara pointed to the mud near the barn. "Their tracks are there. The pry mark is on the side door where he tested the wood. Thomas saw them in town before they came. Thomas nodded, though his mouth trembled. Mr. Vale sent them. The sheriff looked at him. Would you swear to that? Thomas looked toward town, where his mother waited in fear, then back at Clara and Lily. His shoulders rose with one slow breath. Yes. Something like pride flickered across Mason's face. Sheriff Bell put his hat back on. Then we do this proper. I will not stop Vale from coming, because if I refuse him, he will claim I helped hide evidence. But I can make sure he searches with witnesses. Who? Clara asked. Half the town, if that bell keeps ringing. Mason gave a dry laugh. For once, Silas may have called too many eyes to his own show. The plan came quickly. Clara hid nothing in the house. She took the copied ledger page from inside her dress and placed it in Samuel's old Bible on the kitchen table, not under a mattress, not behind a loose board, but in plain sight where truth belonged. Her hands trembled when she opened the Bible. A pressed blue flower fell from between the pages, one Samuel had given her the year Lily was born. For a moment, Clara could not breathe. Mason saw the flower on the table. He did not touch it. He only stood beside her in silence, giving her room to hurt without making her feel watched. I used to think keeping this house meant keeping him, Clara whispered. Mason's voice was gentle. Maybe keeping it means letting what he loved live on. She looked up at him, and in that quiet kitchen, with fear riding toward them and her daughter watching from the doorway, Clara felt something inside her loosen. Not love, not yet, but trust. The first small root of it. Wagons began arriving before 10. Martha Bell came first with 2 women from the church and a basket of biscuits no one had asked for. Mr. Dawson came with a hammer tucked in his belt, pretending he had only come to check a grain order. The blacksmith arrived with his sleeves rolled and his young apprentice behind him. Others followed, some curious, some ashamed, some ready at last to stand where they had once looked away. Clara stepped onto the porch and saw them gathering near her fence. For 2 years she had fought alone on that land. Now the yard was full of footsteps. Lily whispered, "Ma, they came." Clara squeezed her hand. "Yes, sweetheart, they came." Then the road grew quiet. Silas Vale appeared at the rise in a black carriage, polished and clean against the muddy world. 2 riders flanked him. Caleb Rusk rode behind. His eyes moved over the crowd, and the smile slid from his face. Silas stepped down with a folded paper in one gloved hand, an anger hidden behind perfect manners. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "I am here under legal authority to inspect this property and recover stolen bank documents." Mason stood at the foot of the porch steps. Sheriff Bell moved beside him. Clara took 1 step forward, holding Samuel's Bible in both hands. "And I am here," she said, voice clear enough for every soul in the yard to hear, "to show Mercy Creek what kind of man has been writing the truth for himself." Silas's eyes dropped to the Bible. For the first time since Clara had known him, he looked afraid. Silas Vale looked at the Bible in Clara's hands the way a guilty man looks at an open grave. Only for a second. Then his smooth face returned, polished and cold. He adjusted one glove finger, lifted his chin, and turned just enough so the crowd could see the dignity he had spent years wearing like a fine coat. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "grief can make honest people confused." A murmur moved through the yard. Clara held the Bible tighter. "I am not confused." "No," Silas gave a sad little smile, the kind meant to make others feel foolish for doubting him. "Then perhaps Mr. Reed has confused you. He has a long history of blaming bankers for his own failures." Mason did not move, but Clara saw the words strike him. His face stayed hard. His scarred hand closed once, then opened. Silas noticed. He always noticed weakness. "Yes," Silas continued, turning toward the people near the fence. "Some of you know Mason Reed as a drifter who breaks horses. I knew him before that. He had land once. He lost it through bad judgment and pride. Now he has found a widow in distress and filled her head with the same bitterness that ruined him." Lily stepped closer to her mother's skirt, anger shining through fear. Martha Bell crossed her arms. "That does not explain why your hired men came here after midnight." Caleb Rusk shifted in his saddle. Silas's eyes flicked toward him, sharp as a whip, then back to Martha. My men were sent to protect the bank's interest. With a pry bar? Mason asked. Silas smiled thinly. Tools can be misunderstood in the dark. Sheriff Bell stepped forward. Then you will not mind us asking Caleb Rusk what he meant to do with them. Caleb's mouth tightened. He looked toward Silas, waiting for rescue. Silas gave him none. That was the first crack the town could see. Clara opened the Bible. Her fingers brushed Samuel's pressed blue flower, still lying between the pages. For one painful breath, she saw her husband as he had been before fever took him, sleeves rolled, laughing in the sun, promising Lily a pony when the ranch turned good again. Then she lifted the folded ledger page. This was copied from the bank's own record, she said. It shows payments Samuel made that were not credited to the note. Silas's voice snapped colder. A stolen paper has no standing. Thomas Pike stepped from behind Mason. He looked small in the yard, with his hat gripped in both hands and fear plain on his face. His mother stood near the church women, one hand pressed to her mouth. It was not stolen, Thomas said. Silas turned slowly. The crowd went quiet. Thomas swallowed, then spoke louder. I copied it. I work in your office. I know your hand. I know which drawer you keep the side ledger in. I know which payments you marked late after receiving them on time. Silas's face darkened. You ungrateful boy. Thomas flinched but did not step back. My father died believing he failed us, Thomas said, voice shaking. But he paid you too. I found his name in that same ledger. You took our farm after hiding 2 payments. His mother began to cry then, but not weakly. It was the sound of a woman hearing, years too late, that her husband had not been the ruin of them. Mr. Dawson removed his hat. The blacksmith muttered, Lord have mercy. Silas lifted his cane and pointed it at Thomas. This is slander from a clerk caught stealing. No, Mason said, it is a pattern. Silas turned on him. And you would know, a man who drank away his grief and left every place that ever gave him shelter. Mason's eyes did not leave him. I left because you made sure I had nothing to stay for. You signed your papers. Papers I never read proper because I trusted you. Silas laughed. That is not a crime, that is stupidity. The words fell hard. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Clara stepped down from the porch with the Bible still open in her hands. Maybe trust can be used against a person, she said. Maybe grief can, maybe hunger can, maybe a woman alone can be made to feel small enough to surrender what her husband built. She looked over the crowd, her voice steady now. But that does not make the thief clever, it only makes him a thief. Silas's lips drew tight. Sheriff Bell took the copied ledger page and studied it. Thomas, can you swear under oath this matches the bank record? Yes, sir. Can you show me the original? Thomas looked at Silas. If it has not been burned by now. That sentence changed everything. Silas's calm broke. He moved too fast, striking Thomas across the shoulder with his cane. Thomas stumbled and his mother screamed. Mason caught the boy before he fell. The yard erupted in shouts. Sheriff Bell stepped between Silas and the crowd. That is enough. Silas breathed hard, his face no longer polished. You fools! You think one copied page takes a bank from me? You think a widow's tears and a drifter's old sorrow can undo contracts? No, Clara said, but truth can start where fear ends. The sheriff looked toward his deputy who had ridden in with the crowd. Go to the bank. Take Mr. Dawson, the blacksmith, and Reverend Cole as witnesses. Bring the side ledger here if it exists. If anybody tries to stop you, bring them too. Silas's face drained of color. There it was, not a confession, but close enough for every watching eye. Caleb Rusk eased his horse back, trying to slip away. Mason saw him, Caleb. The man froze. You rode under orders, Mason said. You can ride under them all the way to a cell, or you can speak before Silas lets you carry the weight alone. Caleb looked at Silas. Silas would not look back. That was the second crack. Caleb took off his hat. Vale told us to mark damage. If we did not find enough, we were to make some. A hard sound moved through the crowd. anger mixed with shame. Clara closed her eyes. For so long she had believed the ranch was failing because she was not enough, not strong enough, not smart enough, not able enough to carry what Samuel left behind. Now she understood. She had been fighting a hand she could not see. Lily slipped her fingers into Clara's hand. "Ma, does this mean we can stay?" Clara knelt before her daughter, right there in the muddy yard, and brushed a strand of hair from Lily's cheek. "I do not know yet," she said honestly, "but it means we are not alone." If this moment touched your heart, remember Clara's words. Sometimes the first victory is not winning the whole fight. Sometimes it is finding the courage to stand where everyone can see the truth. The deputy and the witnesses rode off toward town. Silas stood silent, surrounded by people who had once feared his name. Mason kept one hand on Thomas's shoulder, steadying the boy. Clara rose and looked across the yard, past the barn, past the patched fence, toward the hill where Samuel was buried. For the first time, the Double C did not feel like a dying place. Then from the road to town, a gunshot cracked through the morning air. The horses reared. Martha screamed. And Mason turned toward the sound with the face of a man who knew the truth had just become dangerous. The gunshot rolled across the pasture and left a silence behind it that felt worse than the sound. For one breath, nobody moved. Then every horse in the yard shifted at once. Caleb Rusk's mount reared and nearly threw him. Martha Bell grabbed the arm of the woman beside her. Lily cried out and Clara pulled her close, turning her own body like a shield. Mason was already moving. "Stay here," he told Clara. "No," she said at once. He stopped just long enough to look at her. His eyes were not hard now, they were pleading. "Clara, please." That one word did what command could not. She stayed, one hand pressed to Lily's head, the other clutching Samuel's Bible against her waist. Sheriff Bell drew his sidearm but kept it pointed down. "Nobody rides alone," he called. "Mason with me. Caleb, you stay where I can see you." Caleb lifted both hands. "I ain't going nowhere." Silas Vale stood near his carriage, pale and tight-lipped. For the first time that morning, he seemed less like a banker and more like a man watching his safe world split at the seams. The sheriff and Mason mounted fast and rode toward town with two men behind them. Dust and damp earth kicked up under the horses' hooves. Clara watched until they dipped beyond the rise. The waiting was its own kind of punishment. Minutes stretched long. The crowd whispered, then quieted, then whispered again. Thomas sat on the porch step, one hand pressed to his shoulder where Silas's cane had struck him. His mother knelt beside him, smoothing his hair like he was a boy again. Clara looked at Silas. "You knew," she said. Silas's eyes shifted to her. "I know nothing about gunfire." "I did not mean the shot." Clara stepped closer, though Lily held her skirt. "You knew about Thomas's father, about Mason, about Samuel. You knew what those hidden payments meant." Silas gave a small, bitter laugh. "You think the world is built by fairness, Mrs. Whitcomb. It is built by men who can read papers better than fools who sign them." Martha Bell's face hardened. "Careful, Silas." He ignored her. His gaze stayed on Clara. "Your husband wanted more than he could hold. So did Mason. So did Thomas's father. Dreams are expensive. I only collected what was owed." Clara looked down at Samuel's Bible, at the worn leather cover his hands had once held. "No," she said softly, "you collected fear." Silas's mouth opened, but no answer came. From the road, hoofbeats returned. Everyone turned. Mason came first, riding hard with Sheriff Bell beside him. Between them rode Reverend Cole on a trembling horse, his coat torn at the sleeve but his face alive and full of shock. Behind him came Mr. Dawson, carrying a locked metal box across his saddle. The blacksmith followed last, leading a riderless horse. Clara's knees weakened. Mason saw her face and called out before she could imagine worse. "No one is dead." A breath seemed to leave the whole yard. Sheriff Bell swung down. "Shot was fired at the road, hit the Reverend's saddlebag, meant to scare them off, I expect." Reverend Cole climbed down stiffly. His hands shook as he touched the hole in the leather bag hanging at his side. "The Lord and poor Ames spared me." Mr. Dawson set the metal box on the ground. The shooter ran when we pushed forward, couldn't see his face, but we found this behind the loose panel in Vale's office. The yard went still. Silas stared at the box. Mason stepped toward him. You always did like hiding truth close enough to admire. Sheriff Bell held out his hand. Key, Silas. Silas straightened, gathering the last of his pride around him. You have no right. I have witnesses, a sworn statement from your clerk, a copied ledger, and a shot fired at men carrying evidence. The sheriff's voice lowered. Do not test how much right I have left. For a long moment, Silas did not move. Then Thomas stood. He walked down the porch steps, pale but steady, and reached into the inside pocket of his coat. From it, he took a small brass key. Silas's face twisted. You little traitor. Thomas looked at him with wet eyes. No, sir, I was loyal too long. He handed the key to Sheriff Bell. The lock opened with a sharp click. Inside were papers, folded notes, payment slips, and a narrow ledger bound in dark leather. Sheriff Bell lifted it like it might burn his hands. He opened to the marked ribbon. Thomas stepped beside him and pointed. There, Samuel Whitcomb, paid $20 in March, marked late in the public book, paid $40 in June, not credited, same here, same again. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth. The sheriff turned the pages. Mason, read, he said. Mason looked away. Thomas pointed again. Those are his cattle shares. Mr. Vale moved debt under his name after the stock sale. It made Mr. Reed look ruined before he ever had a chance. Mason's face went gray. For 15 years, he had carried shame like a brand. He had buried his wife believing his own foolishness had helped kill her. He had walked away from towns and kindness because Silas had taught him to blame himself. Clara saw the pain hit him. She handed Lily to Martha and went to him without caring who watched. She did not speak. She only took his scarred hand in both of hers. Mason looked down at their joined hands. Something broke in his eyes, quietly and completely. Sheriff Bell closed the ledger. Silas Vale, you will come with me. Silas looked around at the town he had ruled with debt and fear. No one stepped forward for him, not Caleb, not the church women, not the ranch hands, not even the men who owed him money. He had spent years buying power and had not purchased one true friend. As the sheriff took him toward the carriage, Silas stopped beside Mason. You still lost her, he said, cruel to the end. Mason flinched. Clara's grip tightened. Mason lifted his eyes, and this time there was no rage in them, only sorrow deep and clean. Yes, he said, but I will not let you take another home. Silas looked away first. By late afternoon, the yard emptied slowly. The sheriff took Silas and the ledger to town. Caleb Rusk gave his statement and rode under guard. Thomas stayed with his mother, both of them shaken but free of the lie that had haunted their family for years. The sun broke through just before evening, touching the wet barn roof with gold. Clara stood beside Mason near the patched fence. Lily was feeding Button from a tin pail in the barn doorway, her small laugh drifting into the open air like a promise. We have proof, Clara said. We have a beginning, Mason answered. She looked at him. Will it be enough? Mason watched the road where Silas had disappeared. For the ranch, maybe. And for you. He did not answer quickly. Then he reached into his coat and took out Ellen's brass button. He held it in his palm a moment before closing Clara's fingers around it. I think, he said, voice rough, I am tired of living only with ghosts. Clara looked down at the small, worn button, then back at the man who had given it to her. Before she could speak, Lily called from the barn. Ma, come quick. There is something hidden under the loose floorboard. Clara and Mason turned together. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, holding up a dust-covered tin box that had Samuel's initials scratched into the lid. The tin box in Lily's hands looked small enough to be forgotten, yet every person left in the yard seemed to feel its weight. Clara crossed the barn first, her steps slow over the worn floorboards. Dust clung to the hem of her dress. The evening light slipped through the patched roof in thin golden lines, touching the old stalls, the hanging bridles, the place where Samuel had once stood laughing with a pitchfork in his hand. Lily held the box out carefully. "It was under there," she said, pointing to a loose board near the grain bin. Button kept sniffing at it. Mason knelt and looked at the scratched initials on the lid. S.W. Samuel Whitcomb. Clara's fingers trembled as she took it. The latch was rusted but not locked. For a moment she could not open it. She had spent 2 years begging the past to leave her alone, and now it sat in her hands, asking to be heard. Mason stood beside her, quiet as a fence post in the wind. "You do not have to open it now," he said. Clara looked at Lily, then toward the hill where Samuel lay buried beneath a wooden cross. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." Inside were papers wrapped in oilcloth, a small pencil worn down nearly to nothing, and a letter folded with Clara's name written across it. Her breath caught. She opened the letter first. The writing was Samuel's, uneven and hurried, but still his. Clara read silently at first, then her voice began to shake as she spoke the words aloud. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I was too late to put things right myself." Lily moved close to her mother's side. Clara pressed on. "I found errors in Mr. Vale's records. At first I thought them mistakes. Then I found more, payments from us, payments from Pike, payments from Mason Reed, though I did not know him, all moved, hidden, or marked false. I meant to take this to Sheriff Bell after the spring roundup, but I fell ill before I could ride." Mason looked down sharply. Clara's eyes filled, but she kept reading. "If the bank comes for the double C, do not believe you failed. You carried more than any woman should have had to carry. The fault is not yours. I should have listened when you told me Mr. Vale smiled too easy. I love you. I love our Lily. Keep the land only if it gives you life. Let it go if it takes too much. Either way, you are my home." The paper lowered in Clara's hands. But he had known. He had seen the lie before death silenced him. Lily began to cry softly. Clara pulled her close, letter pressed between them. Mason turned away, but Clara saw his shoulders shake once. Samuel had written his name too. A dead man had reached across years to tell him the shame was never his alone. The papers in the oilcloth were more than proof. They were copies Samuel had made from public receipts, cattle sale notes, and loan payments. Names filled the pages. Whitcomb, Pike, Reed, others too. Silas Vale had not stolen one ranch. He had built his standing from many quiet ruins. By sunset, Sheriff Bell had returned to the Double C. He read Samuel's letter under the barn lantern, while the town witnesses stood in a half circle. No one spoke lightly. Even the wind seemed to move softer through the open doors. "This changes everything," the sheriff said. And it did. In the weeks that followed, Mercy Creek changed in ways no one expected. Silas Vale did not hang grand speeches over the town anymore. He sat behind iron bars while judges from the county seat sorted through ledgers, notes, and sworn statements. Land he had taken by false records came under review. Families who had carried old shame learned they had been cheated, not cursed. The Double C note was frozen, then struck down. Samuel's payments, once hidden, cleared the debt enough that Clara kept the land free of Silas Vale's hand. Thomas Pike left the bank and took work with Mr. Dawson, where his mother could see him through the window each morning and know he was safe. Caleb Rusk gave testimony and rode out of Mercy Creek under watch, a smaller man than he had looked in the dark. As for Mason Reed, he did not return to the room behind the livery. At first, he stayed to repair the barn proper before winter. Then he stayed to rebuild the north fence. Then he stayed because Lily asked him if Button needed a better stall, and Mason said a calf with such high opinions surely did. Clara never asked him to stay for her. She did not have to. One evening, after the first snow dusted the pasture, Mason walked with Clara to Samuel's grave. He carried Ellen's brass button in his palm. Clara carried Samuel's blue flower, pressed now between fresh pages of the family Bible. They stood together beneath a sky full of pale stars. "I loved her," Mason said. "I know," Clara answered. "I still do, in the way a man loves a road he can never walk again." Clara looked at him then, tears shining but peaceful. "I loved Samuel the same way. Mason nodded. Then he set the brass button at the foot of the cross, not to forget Ellen, but to stop hiding beside her ghost. Clara tucked the blue flower into the Bible and held it against her heart. Behind them, Lily called from the porch, waving both arms. A lantern swung above her head, warm and bright, and Button bawled from the barn as if he too had something important to say. Mason offered Clara his arm. She took it. Years later, folks in Mercy Creek would still tell the story of the widow who stood before a banker with a Bible in her hands, and the lonely cowboy who finally stopped running from the past. But Clara knew the truest part was quieter than that. It was in a child's full plate. It was in a repaired roof holding back the rain. It was in two wounded hearts learning that love did not erase old grief. It simply gave grief a warm place to rest. If this story reminded you that truth can still rise from buried places, hold that feeling close and stay with these frontier tales, where broken hearts sometimes find their way home. And on winter nights, when the lantern moved gently in the barn wind and the double sea stood strong beneath the stars, Clara would look at Mason beside her and know that some lives are not saved all at once. Sometimes they are saved by one honest hand reaching out in the dark.